The Drake Group Education Fund is dedicated to educating the public and professionals in our business with fact-based information, featuring the experts in our profession, so that we might all do a better job of helping college athletes realize the promise of an educational degree and becoming all they can be as students and athletes, and the athletics administrators who are managing these programs. So we welcome you to our 46th webinar. Lastly, congratulations to all of our award winners. These are incredibly talented young writers, and I encourage all of you to read and share their work. And thank you for serving as panelists today, and to all of you for attending. Webinars provide us with the opportunity to share new ideas, recalibrate our thinking on issues, and get up to date on important topics. We are so pleased to have you join us. Before you meet our moderator and panelists, I just want to emphasize our speakers are expressing their own opinions and not the opinions of any organizations in which they're employed or members, unless they make that distinction in their remarks. Now I'm honored to introduce the moderator of today's program. Please meet Mark Hyman, the George Solomon Endowed Chair in Sports Journalism of the Merrill College of Journalism at the University of Maryland.
Thank you, Julie, and welcome everyone to the webinar. That virtual registration that you filled out a few days ago omitted biographies of a few of the people that you'll be meeting today. At that time, we had not announced the winners of the Drake Group Education Fund's Student Journalism Prize for Investigative Reporting on Intercollegiate Athletics. However, we shared that news yesterday, and today we will meet those reporters and hear them talk about their award-winning work. Starting with our first place winner from the Daily Pennsylvanian at the University of Pennsylvania, sports editor Walker Carnathan and deputy sports editor Sean McEwen, who took first place and a $1,000 prize for their deeply reported investigative story, I Don't Feel Safe, Penn Track and Field Program Accused of Sexual Harassment. Vivian Yao, also a DP sports editor, had a byline on that story, and Vivian had a class conflict and could not be with us today. Second place goes to Brendan Galvin, sports editor of the Daily Free Press at Boston University, for a co-byline story, Director of BU Track and Field Cross Country Steps Down Following Abuse Allegations. Mara Melitz was the other reporter on that story, and it's important to recognize her as well. Third place in this year's contest goes to Victor DeFonso, editor-in-chief of the Gettysburgian at Gettysburg College, for his coverage of a controversy that shook the swim program. One of the stories that Victor submitted ran under the disturbing headline, "Students Suspended from Swim Team Amid Reports of Racial Slur Scratched on Student's Body." Victor also had a class conflict, and we expect him at about 2:30. So looking forward to being able to chat with him. So welcome to Walker, Sean, Brendan, and soon Victor. And now I want to turn to this year's judges, who are my friends and colleagues, and really a dream team to assess enterprise and investigative sports journalism. They are Nyla Jean Myers, Senior Assistant Sports Editor at the Minnesota Star-Tribune, Lisa Bell Wilson, Editorial Director, Talent and Development at The Athletic. And there were in addition to me, there were two other judges who are not able to join us today because they are journalists and they are working. It is March Madness week. Miran Fader, Senior Staff Writer for The Ringer, and Jesse Doherty, Staff Writer at The Washington Post, who I just got a text from. Jesse is at the Lenovo Center in Raleigh, preparing for tomorrow's regional and filing on deadline, so he sends his regrets. Finally, there are a couple of more thank yous that I'd like to mention. One to Aidan Curry, a sophomore journalism major at Merrill College here at the University of Maryland, and my contest assistant. We hit all our deadlines over the last couple of months, and all of the credit for that goes to Aidan. So thank you, Aidan. And then finally to Julie Summer and Donna Lopiano of the Drake Group for caring about student sports journalism and for creating this award. Thank you so much. Finally, a word about the contest rules. Judges could not vote for their own schools. I teach at Maryland. I'm a graduate of Penn. Under the rules, I had to recuse myself from voting for any entry submitted from students at either university. Nice going, Daily Pennsylvanian. I didn't vote for you. So let's get started. And I think the natural starting place is to learn a little bit more about the news organizations that these students represent on their campuses. So let's start with the representatives of the Daily Pennsylvanian. Tell us a little bit about the DP. Is it an independent publication of the university? How often does it publish, and who's reading it?
Yeah, I guess I'll take this one first off. Hi, everybody. I'm Walker. Thanks so much for having us today. It's a real honor to be recognized for this award, and of course, to be a panelist on this webinar. A little bit about the DP. We are the University of Pennsylvania's student newspaper. We've been independent from the university for I can't think of exactly how many years now, but it's been, many decades since we became financially independent from the university, which is really important to our mission because it allows us to, publish coverage that is critical of the university or examines topics that maybe if we were financially dependent would otherwise be discouraged. We publish digitally Sunday through Thursday, and we have a daily newsletter called DP Daybreak that goes out every morning during the week. And we also publish a print edition every Thursday. And in addition to that, our audienceship is typically consists of Penn students, of course, but also Penn parents, Penn alumni, specifically for the sports department, which Sean and I represent. It's a lot of alumni and a lot of families of student athletes. And I think we play just a really critical role, especially in our modern times, in terms of making sure the university is held accountable and bringing to light critical issues to the campus community. So it's an honor to work for the DP as a whole, and of course to be here today. Thank you.
Sean, do you want to add anything to that or not?
I can give a small detail. I'm proud to say in the past year, while Walker and Vivian were my wonderful bosses and editors, we're all the same age. I have no pride. No. During that time, we as a department had a really good shift towards investigative and hard-hitting journalism for the sports department. Uh, as a department, it wasn't always the most serious in past years, is what we've been told. And, we really wanted to focus on creating hard-hitting journalism. We had 4 papers up for this award in particular. And we were very proud that in the last year that we could really switch our focuses as a department to both cover the games, the players, the normal ongoings of Penn Athletics, while not forgetting to investigate and talk about student athlete experiences and the financial troubles and NIL and really create some hard-hitting journalism. And I'll credit that to Walker, Vivian, and myself and everyone in the department really who you said about a bit about the workflow. The higher up you get, the more this is a full-time job, 30 hours a week of being in that office. So it took a lot of people, a lot of hours. I'm just very proud to say that, it's a team effort. And we had a lot of people this year really hunkered down to work. So yeah, I'm just very, very proudful of that.
Brendan, tell us about the Daily Free Press.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Like Walker said, it's an honor to be here. Mara and I's article was under the Daily Free Press. We started in 1970. We've been independent ever since. We publish also Sunday through Thursday online. Our print edition is only once a month. It's actually tonight, which is exciting. Credit to Mara. Our investigative section wasn't started until the fall of 2023. And really, she was the start of the investigative section at BU. We've had a lot of great stories come out ever since. We have a bunch of different, different sections that I'll publish, not every day, but it's a great office, just in a great environment to be around, producing some really good work.
Tell us the story behind how you got started at your respective newspapers. Did you respond to something that you received online or in the newspaper? Or had you always wanted to be involved in campus journalism when you arrived on campus?
You go ahead.
Go ahead, Brendan.
All right, sorry. Yeah, so I came into BU knowing I wanted to work in sports journalism. We had like our annual club fair the first weekend of the semester. I signed up to be a sports writer for the Daily Free Press. And ever since then, I've kind of just like continued to kind of climb the ranks at the Free, starting with the sports writer for 2 years, and then last spring I was the sports editor, and now I'm the editor in chief. Which Mara also had a similar path. She started also our freshman fall. We're both juniors, but then she ended up taking a different path. She was our news editor, our features associate editor, and then investigative editor in last fall or last spring, sorry, before being our editor in chief last fall. And she's actually abroad in Australia now, which the time difference was a little tough for her. But yeah, we had similar paths, just kind of climbing the ranks here. But yeah, it's been a great journey.
Walker?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty similar story to Brendan, I guess. I came to Penn knowing that I wanted to, be a part of the sports journalism community. I'd been uh, writing articles about NBA basketball on a blog that 20 people read for like 3 years prior to that. So it was really exciting to, get the chance to do some real reporting. So as soon as the opportunity to join the DP presented itself, I'd already learned a bit about it from, some of my admitted students visits and stuff like that. But I pretty much jumped at the opportunity as soon as I could. One of my most vivid memories at Penn is walking into my first sports meeting 10 minutes early, and Sean was already there, and that was the first time we met. I don't know if he remembers that, but it's a great memory for me. And since then, it's been, the most meaningful and fulfilling part of my college experience. I became deputy sports editor my freshman spring, and then we do a full calendar year term. So I served in that role for calendar year 2023, and then last year, including when the story was published at the end of 2024, I was the overall sports editor along with Vivian, with Sean as deputy editor. And I think we just all made a really great team. And now, of course, Sean is editor, and it's been so great, even in just these past 3 or so months since this term has begun, to see just how he's been able to lead and bring our department even further than me and Vivian were ever able to. So just a big overall shout out to all the DP Sports and overall DP staffers that I've had the chance to work with. It's so great to, be able to make friends across departments and meet people you otherwise might not have. And of course, a shout out to all of our leadership, and of course to Sean for all the great work he's done. And it's been an honor to work with him.
Now he's getting sappy. This is the no need. Um, yeah, like Walker said, similar story as well. I would love to work in sports journalism after college. It's been my goal since I was probably reading the Inquirer when I was 11 with my dad. So coming here and knowing there was no journalism major, the DP was the first choice. I do remember the first meeting. I was incredibly nervous, so I showed up like 30 minutes early when no one was there. I would soon learn that no sports meeting starts on time in the Daily Pennsylvanian. Um, and yeah, Walker was my second editor. He is one of the best writers I've ever met and was a fantastic leader with Vivian. And now I've taken up the mantle as he's moved on to just back to writing. Um, and yeah, it seemed to Walker, it's been an incredibly fulfilling experience. The Daily Pennsylvanian is a very special place. And the amount of work here it's a commitment, but I would never want to spend my time any other way. Shout out my co-editor Valerie, who is now my Vivian, my work partner for the next upcoming year. And I would also like to say that Walker was someone who very much spearheaded the improvements in our department. Same with Vivian, who can't be here today. And to see the leaps and bounds we've made over the past 2 years has been incredibly fulfilling, and also just some really great journalistic work. But yeah, it's just very much interested in working in journalism after college, very committed to the programs and the professional career that I would like to seek out.
Are there news organizations that you're competing against?
For us, it's mainly the Inquirer, I would say, sports-wise. It's ironic. We compete with Philadelphia Inquirer, and I believe the reporter who most covers Penn is watching in the audience right now of this webinar because he's a good friend of ours. Shout out Connor Smith. But that's most of our competition is you go to the same games, you do the same big profile pieces, and besides that, Penn's in the national media a lot, especially recently. I assume you all have heard of Trump taking $200 million away from Penn because of trans athletes competing in our swim team. And we have to get that out before AP News or ESPN or the rest of the nation. And being a student journalist provides that really in-depth, close coverage where you get to beat out major organizations because you're so close and embedded in the community. Athletes trust you more, they respect the paper more. So on a day-to-day basis, we compute the Inquirer, and then we run into national media organizations. It's not like we're making March Madness. No offense to the Penn basketball team, but we have our own national coverage in other ways, track and field, other places, and it's been a very special experience getting to meet people in the professional field. Just recently, the Daily Pennsylvanian sent me to cover the Super Bowl, so I got to meet and mingle with some of the best media and journalistic coverage in the world. We were covering Justin Watson, who's a Penn alum on the Chiefs. I promised there was a Penn connection. It wasn't just an excuse to go to New Orleans. Um, but there is that daily competition with the Inquirer for sure. And then, we have stories that try and be as rangeful and as impactful as possible. So we, of course, talk to and cover the same things at a lot of different outlets.
Yeah, I think Daily Free Press is definitely very similar to them. On a day-to-day basis, we're really just competing with, the smaller outlets in Boston, local outlets that kind of maybe are a little outside of Boston. But then when it comes to a bigger story, anything in our investigative section, we're definitely competing with the bigger outlets, the Globe, the Boston Globe, the Boston Herald. But then in terms of sports, I think the other, like those, the Boston Globe and Boston Herald, won't always look at BU for coverage on sports, especially anything else other than hockey isn't very popular within the Boston sports world. But then when it does come to hockey, we do have our Boston Hockey blog, which is kind of an offset of the Daily Free Press, and they do an amazing job of our hockey coverage. Really could not say anything more. They do a great job. But in terms of their competition, I think it is very similar with, competing with the Globe and the Herald, especially with the end of the hockey season coming up. I know the hockey team has the regionals coming up, and then hopefully the national tournament. So they're doing a great job. But on a day-to-day basis, we're definitely just competing with the smaller areas around Boston. Yeah.
Where do story ideas come from?
Yeah, I think our editorial board does a great job. We have a budget meeting every week, every Sunday night, and they do a great job over the weekend and throughout the week coming up with different story ideas. Whether it's a feature on a concert happening on campus, or it's something happening downtown, and our campus section will get on that. But I really have to credit our editorial board, who does a great job. But then also each section will also have their pitch meeting every week at a different time for every section, obviously. But also our writers will come and pitch once in a while and have some really good ideas too. Yeah, so it comes from all over the place. But I'd say our editorial board pitches a majority of our stories. And like I said, similar, I can't say enough great things about them.
Yeah, I think we have, a wide variety of specific places that our story pitches come from. A lot of them are from similar to Brendan, the editorial staff, specifically in the sports department. A lot of times the way the workflow goes is the two senior sports editors sit down and, just brainstorm story ideas together to assign out to the department. Obviously, it's always better, and we much prefer when the writers pitch the stories themselves. So at our weekly meeting every Tuesday night, we have a time designated to allow article pitches, and we usually get a couple, and sometimes those turn into real enterprising, important stories because the writers themselves are more passionate about them if they've pitched them themselves. Also, I'm sure, as Mark knows, we have a very passionate and involved alumni base who frequently correspond with us by email and suggest/demand specific stories to be written. And sometimes those stories get written and turn out to be great. For example, we had a lot of alumni suggesting that we do a really dedicated feature story on the situation with name, image, and likeness at Penn, and I ended up writing that story last fall, and it was nominated for this award. So there's just a lot of different avenues that story ideas present themselves, and a lot of it just comes from being really integral and sort of tapped into the Penn sports community. If you go to every basketball game, you're going to learn things about the basketball team that you otherwise wouldn't know, and you find a new angle for a profile that you wouldn't have, or you write a feature about something that you wouldn't have previously known about. So a lot of it just comes from following the teams and the athletes really closely, so you can give yourself that really foundational knowledge to then expand from and write interesting features, profiles, and the type of journalism we're talking about here.
Just to add a little bit as well. I feel as though, like, speaking about alumni specifically, there is no one who cares more about Penn sports and Penn ongoing than the alumni who used to watch us when we had good sports. They are incredibly committed, and they do come up with a lot of ideas. I'd like to shout out Walker for always being someone who would push the ball when it came to like pitching story ideas and making sure we didn't just do our normal content. But I just think that story pitching is an art form. It's an incredibly difficult process for a lot of people. And while it falls on the editors, we've had some really talented writers be, I would say, incredibly dedicated and incredibly inventive in the past couple years, really pushing the ball forward of what we cover. And yeah, it's always a team effort, and it's very fun to see in our meetings when everyone's just sitting around, really trying to. Sometimes you overshoot, sometimes you don't have great ideas, but at the end of the day, pushing what we can be to a better place.
I'm taking the next one. Just a short question, which is how big of a staff are you working with? How many people are doing what you do? I know you've mentioned a lot of names here, but in generally, like, how big a newsroom are we talking about here for each of you? And how do you talked a little bit about the paths from when you walk in the door to where you are now. But what does that room look like? Is it a room? I guess should be the next question. Is it a room? Is it an actual newsroom? And what does it look like? And how many people are there? And that what's the vibe? What's the atmosphere?
For us, we have a department with two head editors, traditionally 2 to 3 deputy editors, maybe less. I believe in Walker's year, there's only one deputy himself. Below that, we have associates, anywhere between 2 to 8. And then around a staff of, I would say, 20 to 40 writers. So that's around a 45-person department. That said, we have an entire copy department, entire multimedia department. The entire business, including news, opinion, is around 400 people. 400 very underpaid, very stressed students who very much are just doing this for, in sports terms, the love of the game. And the sports department in particular, it's again always a team effort. I'd like to joke that every time me and Walker do an investigative piece, someone else needs to run the department. Someone else needs to handle pen relays or the basketball coverage that week, and nothing ever gets done without a team effort. But yeah, around just 40 people for our department in specific.
Yeah, so we have a small little office. We like to call it the office under insomnia. Actually, we have insomnia cookies upstairs, which can get dangerous on late nights. But yeah, so starting from the top, we call them our top 3. We have our editor in chief and 2 managing editors. Then we go to our section editors. We have 8 sections. Then we go to associates, probably like 2 to 4, maybe 5 associate editors. And then we go to writers. I'd say certain sections are definitely bigger. I think our news section is pretty big. I think each one has city and campus news has maybe 20 to 30 writers. But then our sports section might have 15 writers on a given semester, or our features might have 10 writers on a certain semester. It just depends on, the time of year and how many writers are signed up to write. But then we have our multimedia section and photo section, which are also pretty small sections, but they do an amazing job. So it's a big team, and probably a total writer base of about maybe 100, 150 writers. So yeah.
I like to hear there are still dedicated copy desks at campus publications. That's exciting. The future looks bright. You both papers, it sounds like the investigative arm and this investigative work is a fairly recent ambition has been built up in the recent years. So can you guys talk about how, like, what the impetus for that was, for focusing on investigations? And everyone knows that college sports these days are so different from when I was in college 100 years ago. And I'm just wondering what sparked the investigative idea in both of your publications.
Yeah. So do you mean like on the certain article, or like
Well, I want to say big picture, like, why did this push into investigations? Was there a topic or something that happened or something in the trends in college athletics or with college athletes that made these publications like, let's really push on investigations? Or was it generally, we want to do more investigative work, and then you went out and found them?
Yeah, I think it's credit to Mara. Like I said, I think it was the fall of 2023 when she was given investigation section editor. And it was really on her to build the section. It was really whatever she made of it, and she did an amazing job that semester. We do our turnover on a semester basis. And ever since then, we've had some amazing investigative editors. Last spring, when me and Mara wrote our article, it was Chloe was our amazing investigative editor. But yeah, it's a fairly recent section. It's grown pretty big in the last 5 semesters. It's been, or 6 semesters. And I think it started with about maybe 5 or 6 writers, and it's grown to almost 20, I think, writers who will attend pitch and try and get their investigative stories pitched and written. But yeah, I mean, it's been not a super long time, but it's been some pretty big growth in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think for us, it's sort of really stemmed, and I'll definitely, give Sean a chance to answer this too, because I think if you were to pick one person at the DP who's responsible for sports's push into investigative journalism, it's him. But I think for us, and for me specifically, the one thing that really comes to mind is that in the DP Sports office, like, all the walls are covered with like previous issues and pictures of previous staffers, and there's this one corner in the office where it's like 2 or 3 really detailed, well done investigative stories done by a DP sports editor named Will Snow, who I've never met, but he wrote these
Amazing
stories
name.
like, yeah, exactly, in like 2017, 2018. And then there hadn't really been as much of that in the years since then, and since me and Sean had joined the department. And at some point someone like acknowledged those papers and said, the sports department used to do really cool, hard-hitting stuff like that. And I heard that as the deputy sports editor, or the sports editor, whatever I was at that point, and thought, well, why can't we do that again? So it's definitely a lot on a as it happens basis. So Sean has a lot of relationships with our student athletes. So a lot of it is just begins with, he hears something and then digs further into it, or it comes from a big concept, like I mentioned, the NIL story, or another story that we wrote that was nominated for this award, Sean and Valerie's breaking story on the Ivy League's decision on the House settlement. So it's difficult to, in my opinion, it's difficult to really manufacture an investigation like that. A lot of times the idea or the concept just presents itself or somehow comes into your purview, and then it's our job as the journalists, obviously, to pursue it and write it in a really responsible and thoughtful way. But I guess to the original point of the question, the impetus was just a desire as the sports department, which a lot of times at many newspapers is maybe secondary to the news department in terms of the seriousness or the gravity in terms of the subjects it covers. Just a desire to also do really important journalism and write stories that matter to the Penn community and beyond.
So a question for Lisa and Nyla. You've been around enterprise and investigative reporters for a very long time. What are the qualities you see in them that explain the quality of their great work? What are the assets that the best investigative and enterprise reporters have?
I can start, I'd say a natural curiosity to find things. I would say the ability to get people to trust you to tell their stories. Often you're going to have to get multiple people, and that stood out in some of the reporting we're going to be talking about here. Those are two things I would say off the top, and the ability to just keep going, because you're going to hit roadblocks and you have to keep going. And these stories are a few things that stand out to me.
I would say I would agree with those two. I would have said those two if she hadn't first. I also think an ability to find the needle in the haystack, or at least notice or be curious about a small detail in a story that might actually be a bigger story. And I think about, as an example, so the Boy on Ice, the Derek Bugard, John Branch to the New York Times from about 15 years ago, when he sort of looked into brain injuries for hockey enforcers. And the impetus for that story was his editor reading in his obituary that he made $1 million. He scored like one goal ever and was a millionaire. And he wanted to know why a player like that was a millionaire. And that was how that whole investigation started. Which was about CTE, drug use, how the enforcers in hockey and the sort of lives that they've been leading, but they were valued commodities in hockey, and were destroying themselves. And that started because an editor wondered why someone who couldn't score any goals was making that much money. And I think about that a lot when you're reading a story about something else, or you're reading a little brief and you're like, I wonder why that is. Asking that question, why is that? And sometimes you can go down a road and the answer to why is not interesting, or it's not another story, but sometimes you can find treasure there if you ask why, about something that doesn't quite make sense to you. Like, you look up on the wall and see, well, that was a really great investigation that they did in 2017. Why were they doing that? What was that about? How did that come to be? And if you have sources in your community and you hear people talking and not just letting it wash over you, like, keep it in the bank. Think about why that is. I talk a lot to people about having fresh eyes on a subject. And as students, as you're only at your schools for a certain amount of time, and each semester as you change over, maybe to a new job or covering a new beat, you bring a fresh view of that into the situation. And you don't accept that the way that it's always been done is the way it should be done. Don't accept that if something just doesn't make sense, or you want to know why, like, just keep asking why. And sometimes it could be about a spreadsheet too. Could be data you're looking at and wondering why it doesn't add up properly. And so it is a little bit of being able to identify what could be the needle in the haystack, and having excitement about looking for that needle.
Yeah, the critical thinking piece is so important. And I think we're all kind of saying the same thing in different ways. But, we publish enterprise stories regularly here at the Povich Center, stories that our students do. And, every project requires you to think through, what is this story really about? Who are the voices that really need to be represented? And, what are the big questions that need to be answered? So, the students here and the reporters that I know who do this well have a great ability to think through these challenges and problem solve, as Lisa said, because there's, a dead end every 15 minutes. You got to figure that out. I promise you we're getting closer to talking about your stories. But one more question, more general question, and that is, as a student on a campus that you're covering, tell us whether there are advantages to being a student reporter, and if there are disadvantages, clue us in on that too. Let's start with Brendan.
Yeah, I'd say it goes both ways. I think some of the advantages, I mean, I'm personally, I've never experienced it, but I've heard of people who are, finding connections for their stories with people in their classes. I mean, you could be sitting next to someone who knows someone who is a great source for your story. But I think it also comes with a disadvantage is that you're just like, you might know them too well. And that point, your relationship with them, it can be affected by the reporting you're doing. If you have a good friend and they give you a source and, something, your story goes on and something happens with that source, I think it just, the relationships between how you're getting your sources as a student, when you're looking for a student source, I think it can go both ways. So yeah, I mean, like you said, it has disadvantages and advantages because you can, the availability of sources is so much greater, especially when I'm at such a big school like BU. But a disadvantage is that there's such a big open availability of sources that it can be hard to, pick the right people to talk to for a story.
In my case or in my experience, I feel like it's my incredible advantage. It's the one thing that I think really puts us apart and has assisted with, especially our investigations. One anecdote I'll give is when Walker was my editor and I was deputy, I met with our athletic communications person. And they said, Sean, and he was speaking about Walker as well. He said, you're like the first likable sports editors in so long. I believe that's why you guys are getting more sources and more interviews. And what, of course, he wasn't meaning was favorable coverage or anything like that, but just the ability to be a student on campus and meet athletes and reassure them that, oh, my coverage will be fair and will be completely impartial, but you can trust me. I'm a colleague here. I've worked, I have not your interests in mind, but I have an interest in journalism in mind, and we can be friends and still get this done because you're going to see a lot of me throughout the year. I always like to apologize to athletes, like I know I'm bothering you. I know you're going to see a lot of me. Um, but I think most of our sources and most of our work that has been accredited or has won awards has come from strictly being students on campus, from being faces they've seen. I think one advantage as well, I'm a bouncer at 2 bars on campus. That's always an assist to a degree. And that's always helped throughout time. But truly, I don't see any disadvantage by being a student journalist. I think it's up to the reporter to always keep your bias at bay, and I trust myself. I can't trust every writer I've ever had at the department, of course. But as an individualistic sense, as long as you are really firm in your ability to be unbiased and really firm in your ability to be professional, it's a great resource. I think the only disadvantage I've ever had is some players or some people are really, really only interested in speaking to professional media, or like they find that like the shiny glaze of the Inquirer or some other publication where they feel as though it's more eyes on them as preferential. But I think over time, especially in the past 2 years that me and Walker have experienced, the respect for the Daily Pennsylvania Sports Section has grown immensely among athletes, and that's something we're incredibly proud of.
We have a very good question that's just been submitted from the audience, so I will read it. How do they create in-depth, investigative, and critical pieces without alienating sources they're dependent on for daily game coverage?
Yeah, I can go first. Especially in Myanmar's case, it was really tough because on our day-to-day basis, whenever we want to talk to an athlete or a coach, we have to go through our sports information director. And so, when we're trying to talk to these track athletes about this incident with the coach and the coach's behaviors in the past, like our big decision was, do we overstep the SID and go straight to the athletes, or do we try and go through the SID and see if he'll allow us to talk to them? And yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. It's tough. So I'm just reading. It was a really tough decision because, it could affect our future coverage. We didn't want to overstep the SID, and then, we're not allowed to sit courtside at a basketball game and talk to head coach Joe Jones after games anymore because we did this article. eventually it all worked out. Both sides we came to an agreement. But yeah, it's a really tricky situation. But it worked out in our article, but also going forward too.
Yeah, I would say, the sort of tension that Brendan's discussing has also been really, a critical subject for us in terms of how we decide how we're going about our, interviewing of certain sources. I would say, for the most part, in terms of our athlete sourcing for, the majority of our investigative stories, or specifically for this track and field story, we have generally made the decision to circumvent the Penn SIDs just because they are generally opposed, obviously, to facilitating reporting that paints Penn Athletics in a potentially negative light. And that's sort of an agreement that we have come to with them over the course of, the last however long that we've been pursuing these investigative stories. That said, we do prioritize ethical journalism in terms of providing Penn Athletics and the implicated parties the necessary opportunity to comment on stories that are impending stories that have impending publication in the DP. So, for example, in last April, Sean and I wrote an investigation into allegations of racism against the Penn lightweight rowing program. And for that story, we individually emailed 37 rowers of the Penn men's lightweight rowing team to give them the opportunity to, provide their perspective on the story, whether it was, whatever that perspective was. We didn't hear back from any of them, but we go through the necessary channels in order to make sure that they're aware of impending publication. And of course, also employees and coaches and spokespeople for the university. We also give the proper notice in terms of stories we may be publishing. So 2 weeks in advance of all of our investigations, we have contacted the Penn Athletic Department and the representatives for the athletic directors and coaches, and we have received statements from from them each time that we include in our investigative stories. So I think we're lucky in that the powers that be, if you will, at Penn do not hold our investigative reporting against us. There's never been a time where I've gone to a basketball game or a football game or anything and felt like, a previous investigative story that we wrote had impeded my ability to pursue our daily game coverage. So we're very grateful and thankful for that the athletic communications staff and the athletic department at Penn understand our role as independent and sometimes investigative journalists. But I think it's also been a matter of just delineating when to go through them, when it's appropriate, and when we have to pursue other channels in order to get the most accurate and thorough picture of the information.
One small note I'll add is the head of athletic communications, Josh LaRosa. I forget his exact title of Penn. We had a sit down meeting with him about these topics, and he was grown and appropriate enough to say, I don't care if what you publish is negative as long as it's true. And for him to say that, knowing we're doing investigative pieces, knowing we are publishing things that are not very great about Penn routinely, that was a great step in our relationship between us and Penn. Not to shout out a random athletic director in this Zoom call, but again, that kind of growth from them and that kind of respect to both sides really did help us grow. But yeah.
Let's talk about your stories. So the DP story, it seems to me, one of the kind of starting points was a relationship that Sean had. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah. I've done, this is my third of 3 investigative pieces I've done, and they've all started with, I think Lisa mentioned earlier, the ability to make people trust you. I started investigating the track team after allegations of a racist incident into a player. That turned into an investigation of an abuse scandal where a woman transferred. That turned into an investigation of another player who was forced off the team, and eventually it got to Kira Lidner, who is in this article. I would like to give a great shout out to her. She's an incredibly brave woman, and journalism is not about the journalist. She was very incredible at telling her story and recapping everything, and this piece would not be the same without her both resilience and amazing ability to work with us. But yes, I I knew Kira had a story to tell. Her teammates were very adamant about it. And I eventually got to speak with her. And we spoke, I think the first interview we did was 4 hours long. We sat outside a coffee shop and talked the entire day, going over what was likely to happen, what she couldn't say, what she was trying to publish, what she could prove. And she was the most accepting and trusting person possible. And I told her that we're going to need emails, we're going to need text chains, we're going to need legal documents. We're in what the kind of the barrier of proof we have to put on ourselves. It also happens that she works. I eventually started work at the same bar as her, a couple months later, so it became coworkers after a while. But the story had already been in much effect. But that relationship, both I would like to credit my own ability to make people feel comfortable. But in this specific case, she was just a absolute pillar. And she stood on her feet and said, I want to tell my story so it doesn't happen again. And it's a very hard thing for well, at the time, 18, 19-year-old to tell a story when she's back off the team at 22. Um, but of course, for those who don't know the story, a coach sexually harassed her for months, and they forced her off the team instead of immediately firing the coach. So she had to recap that, which is not a very fun experience, and it's very hard for me exactly as a man to enter that conversation. But she did a fantastic job recounting. And that was the start of the story. I don't know if we're just going over the start. I don't want to talk about the entire thing just yet. But it really started with her ability to really, I think her bravery, her ability to recap everything, to find emails, to go back and, everything we asked of her as journalists to prove her story, she went through and did in the best way possible. I'm close with her today, and I don't know, she did a fantastic job. And then of course from there we went to proving it all, making sure the story is real. As much as I understood her story, it is not my it's not on me to just accept it. We went to basically prove it was wrong as much as possible by asking everyone else, by finding other documents, by finding other coaches, and that was really the start of our investigation.
Yeah, so ours, I think, is a little different of a start. I think it was a tip sent to the investigative section email, but it was from an anonymous runners chat website called letsrun.com. And it was a claim that the coach at the time had threatened to suffocate a runner with his hands. Obviously, a very serious allegation. So immediately, Mara and I start to try to corroborate that claim. And almost similar to the last question, the athletes at the time were very, very hesitant to talk to us. Again, it was like building trust with their sources. Eventually, we were able to corroborate it. We had two current student athletes speak to us, and yeah, I think that was kind of the start of it. Eventually, we kind of kept digging to find this was not an isolated incident. That the coach was, verbally abusive, very preferential treatment for certain runners. And yeah, I think it all really started with this anonymous chat log, which eventually me, Mara and I were dug deep enough to find there was a deeper story there. But yeah, I thought it was a pretty interesting start to come from it's an everyday chat log. I mean, it's not used by just collegiate athletes, but runners of all kinds. And so I thought that was a pretty interesting way to start an investigative article.
Nyla, what impressed you about the Penn article?
Well, you all have mentioned that you submitted 4 into this contest, and I because I read everything and I did not have to recuse myself from reading all of those. I saw a pattern there. I saw that you were building up the muscles on stories like this and taking these big topics that are prevalent in college sports and really digging down for your community and your locality. And if I'm guessing, if I remember correctly from your cover letters, the rowing story happened first, right?
That's correct.
And then as you were continuing to explore, you know, the experiences of student athletes, this is how this the other one, this track one came after that. And to me, that reflected your staff having sort of keeping an eye on this, like keeping your thumb on the scale of other things that might be going on in the athletic department, or other relationships, you know, between athletes, or other experiences that might be happening. Your ears were open, right? And you were, and I could see the development from the first story to the second one in like the depth of the reporting. Obviously, everyone was on the record essentially, you know, and there were so many it wasn't just an individual incident. There were, you know, the way they handled injuries. There was the, you know, individual things going on between athletes and and the coach. And then there was the overall treatment of the women on the team. And I just thought there were so many layers there, and it really demonstrated a depth in the reporting. Obviously the openness of your sources and their willingness to talk about it. And I think it just covered a lot of territory. In a way that kind of showed how you guys had kind of grown in what you were doing at the DP staff. And that's what and you know, you said it, you had a great, that first source, that first person telling their story was so good. And you know, you were so lucky, or like you know, you built that relationship and you had someone who could clearly deliver and, you know, with documentation too, all of the things that she was talking about. And I think that really made it kind of rise. I think you overall, it was good work. It was good work across the board, all the things that you submitted. But that one kind of had all the pieces together in one place, right?
Lisa, this was your number one choice as well.
It was, yeah. You know, I agree with a lot of what Nyla said. You know, the thoroughness of the reporting, how many people you talk to, the fact that you could get people to go on the record, which is not always easy, and would love to hear a little bit more about how that played itself out, getting the sources on the record, the way you continued to move the story forward, going to Harvard, if I'm remembering correctly, to try to get them to talk, that more folks have reached out to you when you're working on follow-up stories. So it was just impressive the way it started with a relationship that you had and how you built it out and moved it forward. And the reporting is just continuing from there.
Now let's talk a little bit about this issue of anonymous sources versus on the record sources, and how you make those judgments. So I'd like to hear you know, both Brendan and the DP team talk about that and the conversations you were having internally about trying to get sources on the record.
Yeah, I think in Mara and I's case, it was a quick turnaround compared to what it sounds like with their reporting taking months. It was only a couple weeks, I'd say maybe a month, 3 weeks. And so I think it was a quicker decision on, you know, how to handle these sources. And I think in most cases we almost settled for a middle ground. You know, whether it was an alumni we were talking to about, you know, how the coach treated women versus men, and I think we decided, you know, we can give what year she graduated, or what year the current athlete was. I think just finding the middle ground with the speaker, with the source, was the most important. Obviously, you want to have some credibility in your sources, but at the same time, it's a very controversial might not be the way to put it, but it can be dangerous to you know, put out your full name in a story of this caliber. And so we understood that, and I think coming to a middle ground with our sources was eventually how we had to handle it, because it was such a quick turnaround. You know, we only had 2 weeks, 3 weeks to publish this story. So we had to make a quick decision. And I applaud Mara and our editorial board at the time for helping us through that. Because it was some tough decisions on, you know, to push up against a source who wanted to stay completely anonymous, or to try and find a middle ground with them, because at the end of the day, I think what worked for us was kind of building credibility as the article went on with this number of sources where we might not have their full name and, the year they graduated and what they did on track, but we could say, they graduated in this year and they did this, they were a thrower or they were a sprinter, I think was kind of how we settled on settling the anonymous sources.
For our side, these investigative pieces, the work split was I would say 95 to 100% of the investigations, like the actual sourcing, and then Walker and Vivian would handle the writing. Because that is our strengths, in my opinion. I love writing. Walker's an award winner. I'll let him. That was really something I thought he killed, and he did some investigating as well. But it truly was a barrier given to me. And it took months because it was by myself churning along. And then as soon as I felt like we had enough to start trying to publish, that's when I would loop in and say, "Hey guys, let's get a little team together and start trying to go full blast on this." But when it comes to anonymous versus full name sourcing, especially talking about the rowing article, which is all anonymous. In that case, it was one black woman on the team going through immense racism, and she was a freshman and the only black woman on the team. And I told her from the beginning, I warned her myself of the dangers of putting your name in this and it being very obvious who you are. And Kira Lindner at the time when I interviewed her was a senior and off the team and had so much less to be scared of and so much less that was at risk. So that was the big difference. The two pieces was, we had a freshman at the start of her athletic career, still trying to push through and really not trying to ruin her chances of being an A boat one day or having her coach like her, versus an athlete who was done with athletics and had moved on and was confident in her story and had years to process it. Well, one was 3 years prior, one was actively happening. So it was such different emotions for both sides of it. Especially for rowing, I I spent hours on the phone with each person. I think we had 8 people eventually, and it was no one was confident enough to go on because it was all current athletes. It was all people who still had a coach to be fearful of. Their coach would be eventually. They say he transferred to a new school. I like to think he was asked to leave, but that's neither here nor there. And then for track, it was all athletes who had already been done. Um, and I think for the track story, I interviewed over 30 people and we had 14 to 12 on record. And that was, I think I would like to say that yes, that the sourcing by then I'd got better at talking with athletes in particular. But when getting people to feel comfortable, it's truly it's a bit of an art form, it's a bit of a skill, but it's just as much work as you put into it. It's seeing who's friends with who and moving through that. But when it comes to anonymous versus on record, it's the situation. It's how that athlete has a career to look forward to, or this whole meeting is for the protection of athletes, the safety of athletes. Part of that is not just publishing the journalism that the bad things that happen, but it's also giving them a chance to be anonymous and letting them know their rights, letting them know the best path forward for their careers. And my biggest focus throughout all of this was to not ignore that and not to be glory hunting with a story. And that's why the first story was completely anonymous, and that's why the second one was much more confident and much more on record.
One thing I just wanted to add too is that I think a big part of the on-record sourcing is owed to our initial sources, because I think over the course of a full story, it really builds on itself. So as Sean described earlier, Kira was sort of our initial conversation and is the main subject of the story in its published form, but her bravery and willingness to put her name on her story, I think was really integral to other people feeling the same way. So the second and third and fourth and fifth athletes that we then talked to, felt more confident or secure or supported in terms of the idea that it wouldn't just be their name in this story and that there would be other people sharing their stories as well. And it sort of goes back to the idea that we discussed a little bit earlier of having multiple perspectives and stories about the same general underlying issue, and just the idea that it's not one person putting themselves out there and, making this allegation. It's multiple people, all with their names on it, who are all taking this stance against what they, allege is an unjust situation. So I just think, as much as it, was diligent reporting, it's also just owed to the bravery of the sources and their willingness to sort of trust and support one another.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about, this is directed primarily at the DP team. You made a decision to include reporting from the male members of the team, who I was going to say for the most part, but I think entirely were supportive of the coach. The allegations really were coming only from the female members of the team. Tell us about that. Why did you decide to include a section of reporting from the male athletes?
I want to give credit to Walker and our editor-in-chief, Jared Mitovich, who helped assist with us at the end of this. But as much as you're publishing a story about accusations and you support those people, and it's very dangerous, you should also do your very best to prove the other side of the point and be unbiased in your reporting. And the experience of the men's team is also paramount, and it eventually, that journalism, that stay with attitude to interview them as well, resulted in a story that was told of sexism on the team. That he would go to the men's team and be this very happy, lucky guy, and like, you guys got this, and he gave that kind of treatment. And as soon as he spoke with the women's team, he'd be degrading, he'd be sexually inappropriate, he'd be a different person. And that tells another story. And at the end of the day, you're just looking to tell as many facts as possible. And I think it really built up the point we were trying to make. And I know, like, I was going out and doing interviews, and when Walker get back to me, he's like, all right, now you have to go out and get all the men too. Go ahead. Like, like, he set the standard for better journalism for myself, I would like to say. And trust me, it was not very fun, those interviews, especially because a lot of those men saw that coach as a father figure, and we had to let them know as of the accusations against him. And that also is an incredibly important part of the story. Um, so it's really just a commitment to follow through, to knowing everything, every bit you can. Walker was incredible at that, especially because what he was actively writing it, he has a very good vision for what the story needs next, like what next opinion needs to be followed through on. And then Jared, of course, I think he's worked for 15 different professional publications, is a very, very, very consistent and great journalist. Um, he has a great mind for what is exactly needed for something to read like a professional paper. And he would always have the same follow through of, well, like, here's, like you said, the push to Harvard and the push to cover different aspects as well, was always Walker and Jared kind of having that on mind. Same with Vivian, where I think Vivian did most of the Harvard research and reaching out. Again, I wish she was here. She could talk more about it. But yeah, it's just a commitment to telling a full story. As much as you don't want to talk to the men's side, as much as you really want to be supportive of empowering women and have that story told, it's also just making sure you cover every base. And I think I joked with Kira once, and it's the last thing I'll say about this, but I was like, I'm warning you, part of the story, I will have to talk to every one of your teammates, men's and women's, and talk about this, and this is part of the process. She was like, yeah, those motherfuckers can hear all they want. They didn't listen to me back then. And Kira's a great person, but there's it was always a fun aspect of it that I don't know, that we always knew they were going to talk to every person involved.
So
Yeah.
you mentioned
Oh,
you
sorry.
mentioned Jared, Sean. So let's give him a shout out. Who is Jared?
Jared Mitovich is our former EIC. He now works at WHYY. He's worked at Yahoo, CNN. He's personally just a great journalist at the end of the day. And I've learned a decent amount from him because, again, in sports, you don't always come in contact with serious news. The news department probably hits it a lot more often. And on our final day before publication, we were in the office from 5 p.m. all the way to 10 a.m. Making sure the final things were done, getting ready to publish, pulled an all-nighter. Our person who was copy checking fell asleep on the couch. It was a brutal and long night. and Jared was there through every step of the way. But yeah, it was really a combo of Jared and Walker who had their mind on journalism, who had their mind on not letting me run wild and do the interviews we didn't need, but making sure I was talking to people we did need. And that's something I appreciate them both for.
I also want to just give a shout out to our executive editor, who was a big part of this story, Anna Vasa-Perimbol. I like the equivalent of a managing editor at most other newspapers. She was similarly really hands-on and involved, particularly through the last, stages of all of our investigative pieces, including this one. She was right there with us throughout that entire night. So Jared, but also Anna, were both just absolutely, none of this could have been done without both of them. So just a big shout out to both of them.
Brendan, I was very curious about the way the, I guess you would say, firing or resignation of the coach at BU played out, the timing of that and the publication of your story. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it was kind of what Sean had mentioned before, where we had notified BU Athletics that we were going to go out with this story. It went in our last print edition of the spring 2024 semester, and we kind of told them maybe a week in advance, or we'd already emailed them asking for comment. They refused to or they declined to comment. Sorry, and then about maybe 3 or 4 days before, we emailed the athletic director and the communications office. We set up a meeting with the athletic director completely off the record. He kind of just wanted to hear our plan. We told him, we're going forward with this article on Thursday on our last print. It'll be, given out on Friday at classes and in our student union and stuff. And he's like, that sounds good. Like, no pushback whatsoever. And then actually, it was either the night before on Wednesday or Thursday morning where we hear the news that the coach had stepped down. And so at first I was upset because I'm like, we have to change the story so much. But then Mara had explained to me how that's probably better, considering we would have put out 2,500 copies of this, not knowing he had stepped down, a day later. So it worked out in the end. We did obviously change our lead, our title, kind of the basis of our article a little bit. But yeah, it was a really interesting series of events. Meeting with the athletic director, the coach stepping down within 48 hours, and then our print going out the next day. So.
I guess it's probably a good time to kind of take a step back now and ask how these experiences have kind of changed your thinking about journalism and about what you want to do. And we've got two people on the Zoom who are in a position to hire you someday. So let's talk about that. Are you committed to careers in journalism? And how has the experience of reporting these stories informed your thinking about that?
Yeah, I can go. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, this really was a life-changing experience. I came into BU, wanting to be a beat writer. My dream was always, follow around the Red Sox, covering their games, going to spring training, watching games, kind of following the team around. But it was a really just an eye-opening experience of how different sports journalism can be. It was my first ever investigative article. Mara and the editorial board at the time did a great job of showing me the ropes of an investigative article. And since then, I've kind of just I just see how much further and in-depth and important sports journalism can be because of this experience. I mean, before this article was written, I'd never spent maybe more than a week, 2 weeks on, a quick feature or, we're going to a game, writing a recap. But I saw for the first time, how impactful and how journalism can really change lives. Because our article did. It's pretty proud to say that we've reached out, athletes reached out to us after the article and was I didn't, they weren't aware we were writing the article because obviously the track team is so big. There's the alumni of BU track and field is so large. We weren't able to reach out to everybody, obviously, and they're reaching out to us saying how they appreciated our reporting, how they, they were impacted by this coach's actions and his behavior, and how they were really appreciative of our reporting, which I'd never seen before. So it really changed the scope of how I see sports journalism and journalism as a whole.
Yeah, I would say very similarly, the experience of writing this story and the other investigative stories that we've pursued in the last year or so has been a really eye-opening experience for me. I've grown up consuming tons and tons and tons of sports journalism. I always joke that I check ESPN the same way like I check my text messages. But just being able to be on this side of it and write such a impactful story has really, in my eyes, opened, or in my opinion, opened my eyes to the magnitude that sports journalism is capable of and the importance of the reporting. And I would say that I'm 100% dedicated to a career in writing of some kind. I also really enjoyed screenwriting, and I had a internship in Hollywood last summer that I really enjoyed. But and the script I've written was about sports, so it's all tied into one another. But I guess just in the general sense. The thing that I really enjoy the most about sports journalism, the thing that makes me see it as a viable career path is that sports is just a kind of totally unique cross section and intersection of society, and that there's so many people from so many different walks of life who are so many varying degrees of involved, and sometimes that is really beautiful, and sometimes obviously in a lot of the investigative stories, we're forced to look into the maybe uglier aspects of um, the world of athletics and the systems that surround it. But I just think the existence of sports is something that is really integral to our cultural and societal fabric. And covering it is just, in my opinion, one of the greatest joys. And writing these stories that um, hold those systems accountable is just as important.
For myself, uh, I think the one thing I always joke with Walker is I'm quite good at investigative, just talking to people and following those leads. That's the one thing I've adapted well to. I always like to joke as well that like I have to Walker's always bylining with me because he's so much of a better writer. So when he talks about his screenplays and his awards, I would encourage everyone to listen. He is absolutely fantastic. Um, but past that, from my own experience, I would love to be a sports journalist, and the opportunity coming faster and faster as a junior is both fun and terrifying. But I would say this experience in specific, there's nothing more rewarding or fulfilling than to help the community I work for and I work in. I've had people come up to me still years after the rowing piece, years after getting far away from the track piece, thanking me and talking to me and being appreciative. And quite frankly, in the professional space, there is less and less of investigative pieces, especially for student athletes. And that's something that's incredibly disheartening about the professional space, especially because college journalists are usually interns, and the interns are usually expected to write the recaps and not given the free range to do that kind of commitment to learn about their actual athletic space. Um, so I do find every bit of sports journalism rewarding, whether it be a recap, whether it be a feature or profile. Um, but I hope to go into the future and keep going with this exact strain and this exact thought process because I find it disheartening that we all know athletics is wrought with abuse, wrought with unfairness, wrought with things that we all wish to fix but can't. And people have taken steps forward into their careers and not done enough, in my opinion, to really challenge that. It's kind of something, oh, we always accept people are going to be homophobic and racist and abusive physically, and not enough is done actively to challenge that. And my biggest pride of my career at the Daily Pennsylvanian and in college has been to say something about it. But past that, I'd be nowhere without the DP. It's a fantastic place with fantastic people. And I really do hope to follow this as a career. I started this job not considering any of this. I just like the Eagles. I like football. I like basketball. That was, as a freshman, I joined this. It's like, oh, sports. And now I have this big philosophical idea of what journalism is, which is fun and also again terrifying. But now I think I've grown so much more as a man, as a human, and what I expect and what I hope to get out of my career. And I do think like this whole foundation is here for this safety of athletes. If I could talk about every story I couldn't publish that was 10 times worse than these, I think most people would leave the Zoom. Like it's horrible what goes on in college athletics that no one gets to talk about. And I'm incredibly passionate about challenging that. Uh, but yeah, that's my two piece. I'm yapping a little bit too much, but that's again for the future of my career, my biggest goal.
Mark, do you mind if I jump in?
I wish you would.
Okay, question for the three of you, because I think other student journalists can learn from this. When you are working on these investigative stories, and Walker talked about, you're uncovering the uglier side of college athletics, when you are being edited in a way you've never been edited before, dealing with multiple layers of editing, with legal, what are some of the ways you try to go about taking care of your own mental health during this process?
I'll listen to you guys say this as well because I didn't. I would love to hear if anyone else has tips.
I would just say the biggest thing for me was just to remember the importance of the work. There was so many times where, as Sean said, he, conducted the bulk of the interviews where I would be listening to the transcripts and I would just like writhe in my chair because, it's just so visceral and horrible and difficult to listen to. Um, and submerging yourself in that world for an extended period of time, whether it's 1 month or 2 months or 3 months, can take a significant toll. And especially with the additional burden of the time invested in pursuing a story this big. But I think the thing that was really a guiding principle for me across each story and for this track story specifically is just that the work we were doing was necessary and important, and that the publication of this article would have a net positive impact, whether it was on someone I knew or on someone I would never meet. So just constantly reminding myself of that and knowing that it was a necessary sacrifice almost, I think was really important and something that helped me, as you said, Lisa, protect my own mental health throughout the process of writing a story like this.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing concerning like a writer's mental health would be taking on these stories with a partner. I mean, I think if I had written this story on my own in a 3 or 4 week span, like I wouldn't have been able to do it. I mean, I think back to that first interview we had with a current athlete, and we're asking her about this coach and his treatment of women and his treatment of certain athletes, and she breaks down crying in our office, and it's just the three of us sitting in this small little office. And I think just like looking back, if I would have had to sit with that uncomfortableness of kind of similar to what Walker said of like hearing all these descriptions of what's going on by myself, I would never have been able to do it. And so I think when it comes to a story or stories of these magnitudes, taking it on with someone, you can talk to about the story, help me make decisions, like sources or, who to talk to, who to reach out to. That's the biggest thing. But then also kind of what Walker said, thinking of the impact your story has. I think if I were something else or when something else like this comes up, thinking of, the what you hear after the story, reaching out people saying they appreciate your work, they had similar experiences, they love the story. It all pays off in the end. So while it might be a struggle over a short term or a long term, it pays off, and that's all that really matters.
One thing, Brennan, I completely agree because I would not be. I think Walker was a big stone for me, both for rowing and for track, including Vivian as well, who again I'm very sad cannot be here. Um, I felt as though because again, my job was just interviews, and I think my biggest regret of this, the thing that still takes a toll on my mental health, is there's so many stories we weren't able to publish, either because the person requestedly asked they didn't want their story told, or we could not get enough confirmation, like 3 anonymous sources or a claim, and that still sticks with me because there are some really really horrific things that people want published, especially the people, the victims, and we couldn't give them enough space and time and proof. Um, and that weighed on me because again, these for myself were months. And if I did not have Walker, if I did not have a good support system around the office, I think that would have taken much worse toll. But the end goal, the end result is always what's worth it. I think my favorite anecdote of this is after the rowing story. I was walking outside of our food hall, and the entire rowing team is sitting outside talking about the article and celebrating. They don't know who I am, so I just walked by, and the one girl who did said, "Oh, it's Sean," and everyone ran over and spoke about it. And that was my first investigative piece that was very personal and about human reactions and interactions. And I think that reassured me that that's what I want to do for the rest of my time because each of their experiences and positive results from that article, I think I cried then. I'll admit that I was a little bit of a baby. I had like a tear in my eye listening to them. It was very fun. But yeah, having someone else to write it with is an incredibly strong point. I like to joke when Walker first asked to write it with me, I was like, "Oh, you just want a byline. You just want a byline." But he was there to support me the entire time, and I couldn't have done it without him. But yeah,
There's so much about this conversation that I love. First thought is we're talking expansively about sports journalism. So, of course, if you're a sports journalist, you're going to cover a game. You're going to have the score in the first or second paragraph. You're going to write features about the players. And, we talk about this a lot at the Povich Center. That's a very narrow perception of sports journalism. It's really about sports and politics and race and gender and health and safety and business and 12 other things I'm not thinking of right now. And the kind of work that you're doing gives me confidence and hope that those kinds of stories are going to be written by pretty terrific journalists for a long time. So congratulations to you all. I think I don't want to speak for Lisa and Nyla, but it was a good day, the day that I read all of your stories, because it really gave me this very good feeling about the work that's being done on college campuses and the next generation of sports journalists. So you're to be congratulated. Nyla and Lisa, anything you'd like to add?
I want to add one thing here, and what this conversation today has brought to me after reading all your journalism is another quality that I think is important in an investigative journalism, and that is passion. Like talking to you today, I got to really hear and see how passionate you are about this work, and that commitment to it, that sticking to it, that not accepting that this is the way it has to be or this is the way that it is, and trying to find these explanations for why certain things are happening, or not just taking for granted the environment of college athletics and really interrogating it. And I see that in all of you, and that passion is a really important part of being an investigative journalist. And keeping that fire alive is what keeps investigations alive. And I think the second it becomes that you, not to be overly dramatic, but when that passion, when you start to lose that passion, lose that sort of momentum, is I think when what Sean was talking about is when we start to accept the sports world as it is, instead of really digging in and interrogating why it's this way, or does it have to continue to be this way. So I am really impressed with the passion you all have for this work, and I'm very happy to hear you want to continue doing it, because we do need people who are committed to it and are interested in it and excited about it, and in pursuing those getting those question answers that rise up in your worlds.
Yeah, and I'll just add, was really impressed with the stories, reading them and having talked to you today. Truly impressed with the collaboration for both organizations, because people often ask me, what do I like best about working at the Athletic? And I always talk about how our newsroom collaborates and works together. So hearing that going on college campuses, that really kind of struck with me, that it's good to see that it's going on at that level as well. And that's the way you talked about that also for the mental health, just teaming up with someone, the collaboration. It was just really good to hear that today.
So the reporters on the call have already gotten lots of praise. You're not going to get any more. Now I'm going to praise the judges who were so generous with their time. You could not have a better panel of judges than we had. So Nyla, Lisa, Mirren, and Jesse, wherever you are, thank you so much for saying yes. Really appreciate it, and really made this a very cool year for the Drake Group Award. And to the Drake Group, thank you, Julie and Donna.
Can I throw something really quick in?
Yep.
I judged the investigative category for the APAC contest this year right before I read your journalism. And I want to say something about cover letters. You guys wrote great cover letters, and the professionals in the APSC contest could learn a lesson from you guys about writing cover letters for investigations. I just want to thank you for that. And whether that's the form that the Drake Group gives you, or how much of who is responsible, I just want to say, great cover letters, everybody.
We're going to end it there. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Congratulations again.